Before you hear my story, I want you to do something. I want you to think about the smell of your home, not the obvious things, like dinner cooking or fresh laundry, but the unique scent of the place itself. The mixture of old books, the worn fabric of your favorite chair, the person you share your life with. It's the background scent of your world, the smell of safety. For 15 years, my house smelled like home. It smelled of Holly's lemon verbena soap, the faint, clean scent of the oil paints I used in my basement studio, and the rich, dark aroma of the coffee we brewed every single morning. It was the smell of our life. Now it smells like him. It's an aggressive, cloying mix of sandalwood incense and a cologne so expensive, it feels like it's screaming at you. He calls it cleansing the space. I call it an invasion. My name is Gilbert, and for 15 years and 3 months, I was the happily married husband of Holly. We weren't perfect, no couple is, but we were a solid unit. We were the couple our friends pointed to as proof that it could work. We'd met in our late 20s, both a little world-weary, and found a quiet harbor in each other. We built a life, brick by brick. We bought a house in a neighborhood with old growth trees. We planted a garden that was mostly weeds, but had a few triumphant tomato plants every summer, and we filled that house with laughter and arguments and comfortable silence. I'm a graphic designer. I work from home. Holly was an art history professor at the local college. Our life was a good one, a real one. And then Holly's parents died. It was sudden, a car accident on a rain-slicked highway. One minute they were here, a constant, loving presence in her life, and the next they were gone. The grief hit Holly like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of her, knocking the color from her world. She inherited their estate, a considerable sum built from her father's successful construction business. But the money was like ash in her mouth. It didn't feel like a gift, it felt like a tombstone. She was adrift in a sea of sorrow, and I was trying my best to be her anchor, but I was just a man, and she was looking for a miracle. That's when Jet appeared. He didn't walk into our lives, he glided. Holly met him at a grief and renewal workshop that a friend from work had recommended. He wasn't a therapist or a counselor. He was, in his own words, a spiritual cartographer and a life coach. He was handsome in that sharp, predatory way some men are, all sharp jawline, intense eyes, and a voice as smooth and deep as a river. He radiated a dangerous kind of confidence, the kind that preys on uncertainty. He told Holly her grief wasn't a wound to be healed, but a portal to a higher vibrational plane. He didn't talk about loss. He talked about energetic vacancies. At first I tried to be supportive. Holly was hurting, and if this guy's new age babble gave her some comfort, who was I to judge? The strange language started seeping into our home. My calm, rational wife started talking about aligning her chakras and manifesting abundance. I'd come into the kitchen to find her staring at a glass of water, supposedly infusing it with intention. It seemed harmless, if a little silly. But then the language turned on me. Our disagreements, normal couple stuff, were no longer just disagreements. They were misaligned energetic frequencies. My practicality about the budget, especially now with the inheritance, was my scarcity mindset. My concern when she started paying for Jet's one-on-one sessions at $500 an hour was me being trapped in a lower dimensional fear matrix. The real turning point came when he told her, after one of their private sessions, that my presence in our shared bedroom was a source of stagnant and negative energy. He said my skepticism was a form of psychic attack that was blocking her path to enlightenment. And Holly, my Holly, the woman who could debate Renaissance art with ferocious intelligence, she believed him. She came to me one evening, her eyes distant, and explained that for her own spiritual health, she needed me to move into the guest room. She said it wasn't personal, it was energetic. I was banished from my own bed, from the intimate heart of my own marriage, because a charismatic charlatan had labeled me as bad vibes. Jet, meanwhile, became a constant presence. He'd be there in the kitchen in the morning, drinking a green smoothie. He'd be in the den in the afternoon, leading Holly through guided meditations. He moved into our lives, and I was relegated to the margins. He was draining her inheritance, thousands at a time, for his enlightenment seminars and soul-cleansing retreats. It wasn't a single event. It was a slow-motion demolition of the life we had built. I felt like a ghost in my own house, watching a stranger wear my wife's face. I pleaded, I argued, I reasoned, but every argument was twisted and used as further proof of my negativity. He had an answer for everything, a pre-packaged bit of jargon to deflect any rational thought. Which brings me to last night. It was almost 2 in the morning. I couldn't sleep, of course. The guest room bed felt like a slab in a morgue. I went downstairs for a glass of water, walking through the house that felt more like a museum of my past life than my home. The air was thick with that sandalwood incense, a smell I was beginning to truly hate. And there on the den floor next to the armchair, where he so often sat, was Jet's briefcase. He'd forgotten it. A part of me, the old Gilbert, told me to ignore it, to respect his privacy. But I wasn't the old Gilbert anymore. The old Gilbert had a wife and a home. I was a man sleeping in his own guest room. A flicker of something cold and defiant went through me. I knelt down, my heart pounding, and I unlatched the briefcase. Inside, nestled amongst some folders and a laptop, was a heavy leather-bound book. It had no title on the cover, just an embossed symbol, like a stylized serpent eating its own tail. It felt heavy, important. I thought it was his journal, maybe. I opened it. The title page read, "The Sovereign Path Architect's Handbook, for internal use only." I felt a chill crawl up my spine that had nothing to do with the late-hour cool of the house. This wasn't a guide to self-help. It was a manual. And as I turned the first few pages, I realized with a dawning, sickening horror that it was the recruitment and indoctrination handbook for the Sovereign Path, a notorious financial cult the FBI had been investigating for years. And it detailed, in cold, clinical, terrifying detail, every single step of their process for isolating, manipulating, and draining the assets of wealthy recruits. My wife wasn't on a journey of enlightenment. She was a target in a meticulously planned heist of the soul. I didn't go back to the guest room. I sat on the den floor, the heavy book in my lap, and read the entire thing from cover to cover as the moon traced its arc across the sky. The house was silent, save for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, a clock that had belonged to Holly's father. Each tick sounded like a countdown. The manual wasn't written in the flowing, inspirational language Jet used with Holly. It was written in the cold, precise language of a business plan. It was a corporate training manual for psychological warfare. There were chapters with titles that made my blood run cold. Phase 1, Subject Identification and Vulnerability Assessment. It talked about targeting individuals who had recently experienced significant emotional trauma, divorce, loss of a loved one, a career crisis. It specifically mentioned a large inheritance as a jackpot indicator. It listed grief support groups, high-end yoga studios, and self-help seminars as prime hunting grounds. I could literally picture Jet, circling the room at that grief workshop, his eyes scanning for the wealthiest, most broken person there. And he found Holly. Then there was Phase 2, Love Bombing and Ideological Introduction. This section detailed how to shower the target with overwhelming attention and validation, how to mirror their deepest desires for meaning and purpose, and how to introduce the cult's ideology slowly, wrapping predatory concepts in the language of empowerment and healing. It even had a list of approved vibrational keywords, and I recognized every single one of them. Alignment, frequency, manifestation, energetic baggage. They were words that had infested my home, and here they were, listed like items in a marketing toolkit. The chapter that truly broke me was Phase 3, Familial Isolation and Obstacle Neutralization. My stomach clenched as I read it. The manual described, step by step, the process of identifying the primary emotional anchor in the target's life, usually a spouse, a parent, or a close sibling, and systematically redefining that person as a toxic negative force. It called this person the primary obstacle. It provided scripts and psychological tactics for turning the target against their loved one, for framing concern as control, and for framing love as a low-frequency attachment that was holding them back. I wasn't Gilbert, Holly's husband. I was the primary obstacle. My love, my 15 years of shared history, my desperate attempts to protect her, they had all been categorized, labeled, and targeted for neutralization. The move to the guest room wasn't just a whim, it was a strategic objective, a textbook maneuver. I felt a wave of nausea so profound I had to put the book down and press my forehead against the cool wood of the floor. I was reading the blueprint for the destruction of my own life. I flipped through the pages, my hands shaking. The final phases were even more chilling. Phase 4, Asset Liquidation and Energetic Cleansing, which was a euphemism for convincing the target to sell off their property, stocks, and businesses, and turn the money over to the Sovereign Path. It detailed how to create a sense of urgency, framing the transfer of wealth as a necessary act of detachment from the material plane. And Phase 5, environmental control and relocation, the endgame, which involved moving the now isolated and financially drained subject to one of the cult's communes, cutting them off from the outside world entirely. I closed the book, the leather cool against my trembling fingers. The sun was just beginning to cast a pale gray light through the windows. The world outside was waking up to a normal day, but inside our house, a silent, vicious war was being waged, and I hadn't even known I was a soldier. I hadn't understood the enemy. I thought back, sifting through the last year, and everything snapped into a horrifying new focus. It was like I'd been watching a play in a foreign language, and suddenly, I'd been handed a translation. Every strange phrase, every cold glance, every nonsensical argument from Holly, it was all a script. She wasn't just influenced, she was being programmed. A memory surfaced, so sharp and painful it felt like a fresh wound. It was our 10th anniversary. We'd gone back to the small Italian restaurant where we'd had our first date. The place was a little run down, but it was ours. We sat in the same corner booth. I remember the red checkered tablecloth and the flickering candlelight. I'd given her a simple silver locket. Inside I'd engraved the coordinates of that exact spot. She'd cried, these happy, beautiful tears. And she'd leaned across the table and whispered, "You're my true north, Gilbert. You always bring me home." I sat there on the den floor, the memory echoing in the silent room, and a single hot tear traced a path down my cheek. Where was that woman? Who was the stranger sleeping in my bed, in our room, while I was exiled just down the hall? How could my true north have lost her way so completely? Another memory, this one harder. Holly's father, Frank. He was a bear of a man, a custom home builder with hands like catcher's mitts and a heart of pure gold. He was gruff and didn't say much, but you always knew where you stood with him. The day Holly and I got engaged, he took me aside. We were standing in the backyard of the house he'd built for his family. He had a beer in one hand, and he put the other on my shoulder. It felt like it weighed a ton. He looked me straight in the eye and said, "I'm not a fancy man, Gilbert. I build things that last. Foundations, that's what matters. You be a good foundation for my girl. She's got the biggest heart of anyone I know. That makes her strong, but it also makes her a target for the takers of this world. Your job is to be the foundation she can always count on." I had failed. I had let a taker, a predator, slip past my watch and start dismantling the house Frank had entrusted me to protect. The inheritance wasn't just money, it was the physical manifestation of every house Frank had ever built, every beam he'd ever hoisted. It was his life's work, intended to give his daughter security, and I was watching it get funneled into the pockets of a cult. The weight of that failure was crushing. The floorboards above me creaked. Holly was waking up. I quickly slid the manual back into the briefcase, latched it, and pushed it back to the exact spot where I'd found it. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I had to be calm. I had to be normal. The manual had taught me one thing. A direct, emotional confrontation was exactly what they expected. It was what they were prepared for. The primary obstacle was supposed to rage, to plead, to attack. That would only validate Jet's narrative and push Holly further away. I couldn't do that. I had to be smarter. I had to be colder. Holly came down the stairs a few minutes later. She was wearing a white linen dress and had a serene, detached smile on her face. It was the smile she always wore now, a mask of peacefulness that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her real smile, the one that used to crinkle the corners of her eyes, was gone. "Good morning, Gilbert," she said, her voice smooth and even. She glided into the kitchen to make one of Jet's disgusting kelp and spirulina smoothies. The blender whirred, a jarring, mechanical sound in the quiet house. "Morning, Holly," I said, my voice carefully neutral. I was sitting at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee. She poured the green sludge into a glass and turned to me. "Jet and I were talking last night. We feel I've reached a plateau in my journey. There's a new intensive seminar he's leading next month. It's a purity of intent retreat. It's designed to help sever the final energetic tethers to past life traumas and limiting familial patterns." I took a slow sip of my coffee, the ceramic warm in my hands. I knew what was coming. This was Phase 4. Asset liquidation. It sounds expensive, I said, keeping my tone inquisitive, not accusatory. Her serene mask tightened just a fraction. Spiritual growth can't be measured in monetary terms, Gilbert. You know that. It's an investment in my soul's evolution. It's $50,000. $50,000. The words just hung in the air between us. That was more than my annual salary some years when I was starting out. It was a down payment on a house, and she said it like she was talking about buying groceries. I looked her straight in the eye. I had to know. I had to see the programming in action. I chose my words very, very carefully. Holly, I understand wanting to grow. I do, but this is the third retreat in 6 months. I'm worried about our finances. I'm worried about you. Is it possible that my concern isn't just, what did he call it? Residual scarcity mentality. It was a test, a direct challenge to the script. She set her glass down, and the pity in her eyes was the cruelest thing I had ever seen. It was the look you give a dog who can't understand a simple command. Oh, Gilbert, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. Jet prepared me for this, he said. The primary obstacle will often attempt to weaponize shared history and financial fears to maintain its emotional grip. He said your negativity would feel like concern, but it's just the ego fighting for its own survival. My blood turned to ice. It was a direct quote. Not just the sentiment, but the exact phrasing. The primary obstacle will attempt to weaponize shared history and financial fears. Chapter 3. Page 87. I had read it less than 3 hours ago. In that moment, any lingering hope I had that the real Holly was still in there, fighting, just vanished. It was extinguished. The woman I loved was gone, and in her place was a puppet, a beautiful, tragic puppet, mouthing the words of a sociopath. And I saw my path forward with absolute terrifying clarity. The grief I felt curdled into something else, something cold, hard, and sharp. I would no longer be the primary obstacle. I would become the primary threat. I would not be neutralized. I would neutralize him. It wasn't about revenge for my broken heart. Not anymore. It was about rescue. It was about justice. And if revenge was a side effect of justice, then so be it. It wasn't about revenge, until it was. The first rule of fighting an enemy is to know them. Jet had made the single biggest mistake a predator can make. He had dropped his playbook. He had handed me the keys to his entire operation. A direct assault was pointless. The manual itself had a whole section on how to handle it, how to reframe an intervention as a coordinated psychic attack by low-frequency entities. It was designed to further isolate the target, making them feel protected only by the cult. I couldn't fall into that trap. I had to be a ghost. I had to work from the shadows, using his own methods, his own language, against him. I went down to my studio in the basement, the one place in the house that still felt like mine. The smell of oil paints and turpentine was a comforting antidote to the sandalwood incense upstairs. I closed the door, took out my phone, and began the meticulous process of photographing every single page of the architect's handbook. I made sure each image was crisp, clear, and perfectly legible. It took over an hour. This digital copy was my insurance policy, my weapon. After I was done, I went back upstairs, waited for Jet and Holly to leave for a mentoring session, and carefully placed the leather-bound manual back in his briefcase. He would never know it had been disturbed. My next step was to call the one person I knew would understand, the one person who could look at this situation with the same cold analytical eye as the people who wrote that monstrous book. Marcus Vance. We'd been roommates in college, inseparable. I'd been the artsy, philosophical one. He'd been the numbers whiz, the guy who could find the logic in anything. He was now a forensic accountant, one of the best in the state. He specialized in untangling the complicated, deliberate knots of financial fraud. We didn't talk as often as we used to. Life gets in the way, but he was the kind of friend you could call after a year of silence and pick up right where you left off. I dialed his number, my heart thudding. I felt a strange sense of shame, like I was admitting to a catastrophic failure. Gilbert. Man, it's been a minute. Everything okay? His voice was exactly as I remembered, sharp and quick. Not really, Marcus. I'm in some trouble. Well, my wife is. I need your help. It's complicated. I explained everything. The grief, the inheritance, Jet, the guest room, the $50,000 retreats. I felt foolish saying the words energetic alignment and vibrational frequency to a man who lived in a world of spreadsheets and balance sheets. But when I got to the part about the manual, the architect's handbook, Marcus's tone changed. The friendly catch-up vibe was gone, replaced by the focused intensity of the professional he was. Say that again, Gilbert. A manual. Yeah, a leather-bound book. It details their whole process. It's a cult, Marcus. The sovereign path. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line, and then Marcus said something that chilled me to the bone. My Aunt Carol. She lost her entire retirement fund 6 months ago. $250,000. Gone. To a financial spiritualist who was part of an organization called the Everlight Beacon. She's a proud woman. She didn't tell anyone until the bank foreclosed on her house. I've been digging into it on my own time. These guys, Gilbert. They're franchises. They're like fast food chains of human misery. They use the same scripts, the same tactics, the same psychological hooks. The names are different, but the poison is the same. Send me those pictures. Send me every single page. I want to see their playbook. Suddenly, I wasn't alone anymore. My personal tragedy had connected with his. This wasn't just a job for him now, it was personal. He was as invested as I was. 2 days later, I was in Marcus's office in the city. It was a stark, minimalist space, glass, steel, and screens displaying scrolling lines of code and numbers. It was the complete opposite of the cloying, incense-filled atmosphere of my home. It felt clean, logical. He had printed out every page I'd sent him, and they were spread across a massive conference table like a general's battle maps. Marcus, dressed in a sharp suit, but with his tie loosened and sleeves rolled up, was pacing around the table, a pen in his hand, making notes. "This is incredible, Gil," he said, not with admiration, but with a kind of horrified awe. "This is the Rosetta Stone of this entire scummy industry. They've laid out their whole corporate structure, their entire criminal methodology. It's arrogant. Unbelievably arrogant." He tapped a page near the back of the book. "Look here. Tiered uplink protocol. This is their financial structure. Your boy Jet, he's not the kingpin. He's a middle manager. See, he's a Tier 3 architect. He has to kick up 40% of his gross intake to a Tier 2 illuminator, who then kicks up 50% of that to the Tier 1 progenitor. Jet is just a glorified regional sales director in a pyramid scheme. He's got quotas to meet, just like any other salesman." This was the hidden leverage. My focus had been entirely on Jet, on the man who had invaded my home and stolen my wife, but he was just a symptom of the disease. The real enemy was the organization itself, the faceless progenitor at the top getting rich off the wreckage of people's lives. "Jet's biggest fear isn't you, Gilbert," Marcus explained, his eyes glinting with a cold fire. "It's his bosses. It's failing to meet his quota. It's getting caught skimming off the top. He's just as trapped in this system as Holly is, in a different way. We don't just expose the salesman. We burn down the entire company." For the next few weeks, Marcus and I fell into a rhythm. He was the strategist. I was the man on the inside. He began the painstaking work of tracing the money. Holly had been making smaller transfers from her main checking account, which she had topped up from the inheritance trust. Jet had been smart, keeping the withdrawals under the threshold that would trigger a bank review. Marcus started building a map of where the money went, following it through a dizzying maze of shell corporations and LLCs. "He's sloppy," Marcus muttered. One afternoon over the phone, a note of triumph in his voice. "The Sovereign Path has a few primary holding companies. He's funneling the money to one called Enlightened Ventures LLC. I've seen this one before. It was linked to a real estate scam in Arizona 3 years ago. The guy is reusing his dirty laundry. He's arrogant, and he's lazy. That's how we'll get him." While Marcus tracked the money, my job was to observe and prepare. I used the manual as my guide. I read the chapter on obstacle neutralization over and over, learning to recognize the tactics before they were deployed. I had to become a master of psychological defense. The manual warned that the next step after initial asset drain was physical relocation and environmental control. They were going to try to move her. They had to get her out of our house, away from the photos on the walls, away from the garden we planted, away from any physical reminder of her life, before Jet. The clock was ticking louder now. I needed to do more than just defend. I had to go on the offensive, but in a way they wouldn't recognize as an attack. So I started my silent takeover. The manual talked about how the cult's influence expands to fill energetic voids left by the target's withdrawal from their old life. I decided to start filling those voids myself. I stopped hiding in the guest room. I started existing in my own home again. I didn't initiate conversations about Jet or the money. I was just there. I set up my laptop at the dining room table instead of in the basement. I sat in the living room in the evenings and read. I was a calm, quiet, constant presence. It drove Jet insane. He was a performer who was used to controlling the stage. My silent refusal to be either an angry antagonist or a defeated victim threw him off his script. He couldn't label my quiet presence as negative energy without looking like a paranoid lunatic. Then I started to bring the sense of our shared past back into the house. One afternoon, I went to the market and bought all the ingredients for seafood sayapino. It was a complicated all-day recipe that Holly and I used to make together on special occasions. It was our dish. The rich aroma of simmering tomatoes, garlic, saffron, and seafood slowly filled every room in the house. It was the smell of a dozen happy memories. I was in the kitchen, stirring the pot, when Holly came downstairs. She stopped dead in the doorway, her eyes wide. She sniffed the air, and for a fleeting second, I saw a flicker of the real Holly. A flicker of confusion, of a memory struggling to break through the fog. "Gilbert?" she said. Her voice small, uncertain. "You're making sayapino." "Just for me," I said calmly, not looking up from the pot. I had a craving. Jet appeared behind her, his face a mask of displeasure. The smell of our life was overwhelming. The smell of his incense. He put a proprietary hand on Holly's shoulder and said, "Darling, remember what we discussed about an attachment to sensory triggers from the past. It's a form of energetic bondage." Holly's face went blank again. The mask slammed back down. "Of course, Jet. You're right," she said, and allowed him to lead her away. But I had seen it. I had reached her. Just for a second. The foundation had a crack in it. My next move was more direct. Holly's father, Frank, had been a smart man. I contacted the family lawyer who had set up Holly's parents' trust. I explained the situation, my voice low and urgent. The lawyer, a kind, elderly man named Mr. Peterson, who had known Holly since she was a little girl, listened patiently. He confirmed what I had suspected. Frank had structured the trust with a protective clause. Any single withdrawal or transfer over $25,000 required 2 signatures, Holly's, and the signature of the trust's appointed executor. The executor was me. Jet didn't know. He had been having Holly drain her checking account, which she had been replenishing with smaller sub-$25,000 transfers from the trust. He was getting the money, but he was doing it the slow way. The $50,000 purity of intent retreat was his first attempt to go for a big score. "Mr. Peterson," I said, "I need to put a temporary freeze on all transfers. I believe my wife is being subjected to undue influence." "That's a serious accusation, Gilbert. It could get messy," he warned. "It's already messy," I replied. "I just need to buy some time." He agreed. He placed an administrative hold on the account, pending a review. It was a legal gray area, a temporary measure, but it was a wall. A small one, but a wall nonetheless. A week later, the wall held. Holly came to me, her face pale with a mixture of anger and confusion. Jet stood behind her, his arms crossed, his serene guru facade starting to fray at the edges. "The transfer didn't go through," Holly said, her voice trembling slightly. "The bank said there's a hold on the trust." "Did you do this, Gilbert?" "I'm the executor of the trust, Holly," I said, my voice even and calm. I was sitting at the dining room table, my laptop open. I didn't look up at them. I was denying them the confrontation they craved. "It's my fiduciary duty to protect your assets." A $50,000 transfer to an organization with no clear business registration raised a red flag. "It's a standard security protocol." Jet stepped forward, his voice losing its soothing cadence and taking on a hard, ugly edge. "This is exactly what I warned you about, Holly. This is a desperate act of control from a man terrified of losing his grip. He is actively, maliciously sabotaging your spiritual journey. The panic was rolling off him in waves. The calm, enlightened master was gone. In his place was a frustrated con man, whose commission had just been blocked. His mask was slipping, and for the first time I think Holly saw it too. She looked from his angry, contorted face to my calm, quiet one, and a sliver of doubt entered her eyes. The foundation had another crack. The silent takeover was working. The blocked $50,000 transfer was the tipping point. The pressure Jet had been applying to Holly intensified, but it was no longer smooth and seductive. It was sharp and desperate. The guru was gone, replaced by an impatient, irritable taskmaster. His serene lectures on detachment from the material plane were replaced with urgent, high-pressure sales pitches about the absolute necessity of the purity of intent retreat. He was a man whose paycheck was being held up, and his composure was disintegrating with every passing day. My silent campaign continued. I didn't argue or raise my voice. I just occupied my own home. I cooked meals whose familiar aromas were a direct contradiction to his sterile, joyless diet. I filled the house with music from our past, the jazz records we used to listen to on Sunday mornings, the classical station we'd have on while we read. Each note, each scent, was a small anchor thrown into Holly's past, a quiet reminder of a life that had been real and tangible. I also started my counter-programming. I knew from the manual that cults work by creating an information vacuum. They become the sole source of truth. I started leaving books on the coffee table and the kitchen counter, right where Holly would see them. Not aggressive, anti-cult books, but subtle, thought-provoking ones. I left out a copy of Carl Sagan's The Demon-Haunted World, a brilliant takedown of pseudoscience. I left out a well-regarded history of famous financial manias, like the tulip craze and the South Sea bubble. I never mentioned the books. I just left them there, silent seeds of critical thought. I saw her pick them up a few times, her brow furrowed in thought before Jet would enter the room, and she'd put them down guiltily. The panic from Jet's side was becoming palpable. He started making mistakes. He'd leave his phone lying around, and I'd see angry texts light up the screen. "Where is the transfer?" one read. "Tier 2 is not happy," said another. Marcus was right. He was just a middle manager, and his bosses were getting angry. His own survival within the sovereign path was now on the line. This is when he played his final card, the one I had been expecting. Phase 5, physical relocation. He knew he was losing control of the environment. He had to get Holly out of the house, away from me, away from the memories, away from the silent, questioning presence of the books and the music and the smell of our life. He had to move her to a place where he was the only voice she could hear. He and Holly confronted me one evening. Jet did the talking, his voice once again smooth and controlled, but his eyes were hard and tight. "Gilbert," he began, "it has become clear that this environment is spiritually toxic for Holly. Her energy is being constantly compromised by your resistance. For her own protection, and to allow her to achieve the breakthrough she so richly deserves, we will be moving to the Sovereign Path Enlightenment Center in New Mexico." Holly stood beside him, her expression a heartbreaking mixture of defiance and fear. She wouldn't look at me. "I'm leaving, Gilbert," she said to the floor. "I need to do this for me." This was the moment. The us versus him ultimatum. They expected me to rage, to forbid it, to prove once and for all that I was the controlling, negative jailer Jet had painted me to be. They wanted me to give them the dramatic scene they needed to justify their escape. I took a deep breath and looked at Holly, really looked at her, trying to push my gaze past the fog in her eyes. "Okay," I said quietly. The single word threw them completely off balance. Jet's jaw tightened. Holly finally looked up, her mouth slightly agape. "This wasn't in the script." "Okay," she repeated, her voice a whisper. "Yes," I said, my voice firm but gentle. "If you feel you need to go, I won't stand in your way. But before you do, I'm asking for one thing. For the sake of the 15 years we built in this house, one final conversation. You, me, and Jet. I want to understand. I want to hear it all directly. No more talking through each other. Just one, final, honest conversation." Jet's eyes narrowed. He was suspicious, but he also saw the opportunity. A final chance to land the knockout blow, to prove my negativity in front of Holly and solidify his control forever. He saw it as his victory lap. Fine, he sneered, a smug smile playing on his lips. We can give you that. A final moment of clarity for you. We'll talk tomorrow night. He thought he was setting the stage for his final triumph. He had no idea he was walking into a trap he had designed himself. While they were planning their speeches, I was making my own preparations. My so-called family exodus wasn't about Holly's family, it was about the family of victims. The sovereign path had created, Marcus's research had been fruitful. He had found 2 other families in our state who had been devastated by this cult. One was an elderly couple whose son had drained their life savings for Jet. The other was a woman named Sarah, whose husband, a successful architect, had fallen under the spell of the sovereign path, lost his business, and eventually took his own life, leaving her with 2 small children and a mountain of debt. I spoke with them. I spoke with Sarah. Hearing her story, the raw pain in her voice solidified any lingering doubt I had about the path I was on. This was bigger than my marriage, bigger than my house. This was about stopping a predator from creating more stories like hers. We had formed a coalition, a small, grim army, bound by shared grief and a burning desire for justice. Our lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense man, Marcus had recommended, had compiled our statements, along with Marcus's financial tracking, into a damning dossier. The stage was set. Not for the victory lap Jet was expecting, but for a reckoning. The next evening, the 3 of us gathered in the living room. The air was thick with tension. Jet sat in my armchair, the one my father had given me, looking smug and proprietary. He had his legs crossed, a look of condescending patience on his face. Holly sat on the sofa, perched on the edge of the cushion, her hands twisting a handkerchief in her lap. She looked like a prisoner about to be sentenced. I took a seat in a straight-backed chair opposite them, a manila folder resting on my knees. "All right, Gilbert," Jet began, his voice dripping with magnanimity. "We're here, we're listening. This is your opportunity to release your energetic attachments and wish Holly well on her journey." I didn't say a word. I simply reached down, picked up a book from the floor beside my chair, and placed it on the coffee table between us. It was my pristine, unmarked copy of the architect's handbook. The effect was instantaneous and profound. Jet's smug expression dissolved. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a pasty, sickly white. His eyes, which a moment before had been full of arrogant confidence, were now wide with pure, animal panic. He recognized it. He knew. "I believe this is yours, Jet," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "Or at least, it's a copy of your company's training manual." I found it quite illuminating. Holly stared at the book, then at Jet's terrified face, her own expression a mask of utter confusion. "What is that?" she asked, her voice trembling. I ignored her for a moment. My eyes locked on Jet. I particularly enjoyed Chapter 3, Familial Isolation and Obstacle Neutralization. You know, the part that advises the architect on how to frame a concerned spouse as a primary obstacles, who weaponizes financial fears to maintain control. I turned my gaze to Holly, my heart aching for the blow I was about to deliver. "He didn't predict my behavior, Holly. He wasn't a psychic. He was reading from a script. Your script." Before Jet could stammer out a denial, a sound came from the dining room. The door swung open, and Marcus walked in, followed by a woman in a sharp business suit, our lawyer, Maria. Marcus was holding a thick black binder. He didn't look at Jet. He walked directly to Holly and placed the binder gently on the coffee table next to the cult's manual. "Holly," Marcus said, his voice full of a sad kindness. "My name is Marcus Vance. I'm Gilbert's friend. I'm also a forensic accountant. And this," he tapped the binder, "is where your money has gone." He opened the binder. Inside were not numbers and spreadsheets, but simple, clear, visual flowcharts. He had translated the complex financial web into a story she could understand. There was a box labeled, "Your Inheritance." An arrow led from it to another box, "Jet's Holding Account." And from there a series of arrows pointed to other boxes. Enlightened Ventures LLC, Arizona Real Estate Scam, 2019. Sovereign Holdings International, Cayman Islands, and at the very top, a box labeled Tier 1 Progenitor, Unknown. "He wasn't investing in your soul, Holly," Marcus said softly. "He was meeting a sales quota. You weren't his student. You were his commission. Holly stared at the pages, her hand fluttering to her mouth. She looked from the flowcharts to Jet's ashen face. The entire artifice of his enlightenment, the entire structure of her new reality, was collapsing in on her in real time. Then I delivered the final blow. The FBI has had an open investigation into the Sovereign Path for 2 years, Jet, I said, my voice as cold and hard as steel. They've been trying to get inside, to understand the structure. They just needed a key. They needed a playbook. An architect's handbook, if you will. I pulled my phone from my pocket. An hour ago, our lawyer Maria sent a full digital copy of that book, along with Marcus's complete financial report and the sworn notarized statements from Sarah Porter, whose husband you drove to suicide, and the Clement family, whose son you fleeced. Directly to the lead agent on that investigation. Your bosses are about to have a very, very bad day. And it's all thanks to you. Your arrogance. Your carelessness in leaving your manual behind. Jet shot to his feet, his eyes darting towards the front door. The guru was gone. The enlightened master was gone. All that was left was a common thief, a cornered rat looking for an escape route. But it was Holly's voice that stopped him. It was just a whisper, but it cut through the tension in the room like a shard of glass. Gilbert. I turned to her. The fog was gone from her eyes. The bewitched, serene mask was shattered. In its place was a look of dawning, gut-wrenching, absolute horror. The real Holly was looking at me for the first time in over a year, and her eyes were filled with the terrifying clarity of a woman waking up to find herself in the ruins of her own life. Gilbert, she whispered again, tears streaming down her face. What have I done? Jet never made it to New Mexico. He didn't even make it out of the county. The FBI, armed with the manual, the key to the entire organizational structure, and Marcus's meticulously documented financial trails, moved fast. They didn't just pick up Jet, they executed a coordinated, multi-state takedown of the Sovereign Path's entire leadership structure. The Tier 2 illuminators and the Tier 1 progenitor, a bland-looking accountant from Ohio, named Kevin, were all arrested. The architect's handbook became Exhibit A in a massive federal fraud and racketeering case. Jet, the charismatic guru, was just another domino to fall. He took a plea deal, turning on his bosses for a reduced sentence, a final, pathetic act of self-preservation from a man whose entire existence was built on lies. The aftermath in our house was quiet, terribly quiet. The sandalwood incense was thrown away, the windows thrown open to let in the fresh, clean air. But the smell of betrayal lingered for a long time. Holly was broken. It's the only word for it. The process of waking up from a cult isn't like flipping a switch. It's a violent, agonizing crawl out of a deep, dark cave. Every memory of the past year had to be re-examined, recontextualized, not as a spiritual journey, but as a systematic violation. Every word of praise from Jet was now a calculated manipulation. Every moment of enlightenment was an act of theft. She was consumed by a tidal wave of shame, guilt, and grief. Grief for her parents, which she'd never been allowed to properly process, and a new terrible grief for the trust she had shattered and the man she had banished. Our future is a huge, unanswered question. There are days when I see a glimpse of the woman I married, a flash of her old wit or the warmth in her eyes, and a fragile tendril of hope sprouts in my chest. Then there are other days, days filled with a heavy, oppressive silence, where the chasm between us feels too wide to ever cross. We're in therapy, both together and separately. The therapist says it's possible to rebuild, but that the foundation of our marriage is gone. We would have to start from scratch, on new, uncertain ground. I don't know if we can. I don't even know if I want to. Can you ever truly trust someone again after they've been convinced you were the enemy? It's a debatable point, and I'm living the debate every single day. As for me, I'm no longer in the guest room, but some nights our old bedroom still feels too large, too empty. I spend a lot of time in my studio painting again, losing myself in color and form. I'm rediscovering myself. Not as Gilbert, Holly's husband, but as Gilbert, the man who stared into the abyss and didn't blink. The man who learned to be cold and quiet and strategic. The man who took the enemy's playbook and used it to burn their world to the ground. It wasn't about revenge in the end, it was about truth. It was about rescuing what was left of the woman I loved from the clutches of a monster. But I'd be lying if I said there wasn't a small dark part of me that took a grim satisfaction in watching it all burn. The world is full of people like Jet. They don't always wear robes or call themselves gurus. Sometimes they're a charming new business partner, a too-good-to-be-true online romance, or a family member who preys on your sense of obligation. They are predators of the heart, and they feast on vulnerability. They count on your silence. They count on the shame of their victims. They dress up greed as enlightenment and call poison medicine. So I'm telling you this, all of you listening. Look out for the people you love, and listen, please listen, to that little voice in your gut, that small persistent feeling that something is wrong. Because a predator's favorite weapon is the love you have for their victim. They will use your own heart against you. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Do you think a marriage like mine can, or even should, be saved after a betrayal that deep? Let me know what you think in the comments below. I read them all, and if you found something of value in my story, please consider subscribing. I'll be sharing more stories of fighting back, of finding justice in a world that isn't always fair, because sometimes you learn that the only way to protect the quiet life you love is to learn how to make a deafening noise.